I never thought I would become the kind of person who measures ice melt in batch numbers. But after what happened with Brenda Hutchinson from the HOA, I learned to document everything down to the microscopic detail. My name is Henry Irving, and I live in a planned community called Riverside Meadows in Naperville, Illinois, where the Homeowners Association has more power than common sense, and the board president has made it her personal mission to make my life miserable over the most ridiculous things imaginable. It started in early February, when we got hit with one of those brutal Midwestern ice storms that turns every driveway and sidewalk into a skating rink. I had just moved into my house on Elmwood Court 3 months prior, a nice 2-story colonial that I bought after getting promoted to senior project manager at a tech consulting firm in Chicago. The house was perfect, the neighborhood looked pristine, and I figured the HOA would be a minor inconvenience at worst. I was so wrong it is almost funny now, except it was not funny at all when it was happening. The morning after the ice storm, I woke up at 6 to get my driveway and sidewalk cleared before heading to work. I am talking about a solid inch of ice coating everything, the kind that does not chip away easily and requires serious chemical intervention. I had purchased a premium bag of ice melt from Jensen's Hardware 2 days before the storm, anticipating the weather forecast. This was not your basic rock salt either. I had splurged on the good stuff, a 50-pound bag of calcium chloride pellets that cost me $78, because it worked down to negative 25 degrees and would not damage my new concrete driveway. The bag had a batch number printed right on it, something I noticed because the cashier mentioned they track their premium products for quality control purposes. I hauled the bag out of my garage and started spreading the pellets across my driveway and the sidewalk in front of my property. The HOA has strict rules about keeping sidewalks clear within 24 hours of any snow or ice event, with fines starting at $100 and going up from there. I was not about to give them any ammunition, especially after Brenda had already sent me 2 violation notices in my first 3 months. The first was because my garbage cans were visible from the street for more than 12 hours after collection day, which apparently violated Section 7.3 of the Community Guidelines. The second was because I had hung a simple wreath on my front door in December that had small battery-operated lights, and decorative lighting required pre-approval from the Architectural Review Committee, which Brenda chaired in addition to being HOA president. I was about halfway through spreading the ice melt when my phone rang. It was my boss calling about an emergency client situation that required immediate attention. A major database migration had failed overnight, and I needed to get to the office right away to help the team troubleshoot. I quickly spread the rest of the ice melt, tossed the nearly empty bag back in my garage, and grabbed my work bag. I did not even bother changing out of my casual clothes, just threw on a jacket and headed out. The ice melt was already working, creating a layer of brine on the concrete that would break down the ice over the next few hours. When I got home that evening around 8 o'clock, exhausted from a 14-hour workday, I pulled into my garage and noticed something odd. The bag of ice melt that I had left sitting near my tool bench was gone. I stood there for a moment, wondering if I had moved it and forgotten. But no, I distinctly remembered tossing it there that morning because I was in a rush. The bag had maybe 5 pounds left in it, hardly enough to be worth stealing, but it was definitely missing. I checked around the garage, thinking maybe it had fallen over or I had accidentally kicked it somewhere. Nothing. Then I noticed my side door was unlocked. I always lock that door. Always. It is a habit drilled into me from living in Chicago proper before moving to the suburbs. My stomach dropped as I realized someone had been in my garage. I went through the rest of the garage carefully, checking to see if anything else was missing. My tools were all there. My bike was there. The snow blower was there. Just the partial bag of ice melt, which made no sense. Who breaks into someone's garage to steal 5 pounds of ice melt worth maybe $8? The next morning, I got my answer. I was getting ready for work when there was a sharp knock on my door. I opened it to find Brenda Hutchinson standing on my porch, her face pinched in that expression of righteous indignation she seemed to wear permanently. She was in her late 40s, with severely styled blonde hair that looked like it had been set with an entire can of hairspray, and she was wearing a puffy vest over a turtleneck despite the temperature being in the mid-30s. "Mr. Irving," she said, not bothering with any greeting, "I am here to inform you of a serious violation of HOA regulations. You have been using unauthorized ice melt products on your property." I stared at her. "Excuse me." She held up her phone, showing me a photo. Section 12.6 of the Community Guidelines clearly states that only HOA-approved ice melt products may be used on driveways and sidewalks. "Your ice melt," she gestured toward my driveway, "is not on the approved list. The approved product is standard rock salt, which can be purchased in bulk through the HOA at a discounted rate. Brenda, I used calcium chloride pellets because they are better for new concrete and work in colder temperatures. They are also more environmentally friendly." That is irrelevant. The rules state approved products only. You have been issued a violation notice, and the fine is $200. Additionally, you are required to remove the unauthorized product from your property immediately and retreat your driveway and sidewalk with approved product within 48 hours. I felt my jaw clench. You have got to be kidding me. I spent almost $80 on that ice melt specifically because it would not damage my driveway. The rules are the rules, Mr. Irving. Perhaps if you attended HOA meetings, you would be more familiar with them. The violation notice has been emailed to you. Payment is due within 30 days. She turned to walk away, then paused. "Oh, and I have documented the violation with photographs and will be monitoring your property to ensure compliance." She walked back to her own house, which was 3 doors down from mine on the same side of the street. I watched her go, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. $200 for using the wrong kind of ice melt. It was insane. I went to work fuming about it, complaining to my colleague Marcus during lunch. He laughed and told me his own HOA horror stories from when he lived in a planned community in Schaumburg. "Just wait," he said. "They always get worse before they get better. These HOA board members have nothing better to do than police everyone else's lives." That afternoon, I decided to take action. I was not just going to roll over and pay a $200 fine for something so ridiculous. I looked up the HOA bylaws and community guidelines, reading through all 47 pages of dense regulatory text. Section 12.6 did indeed mention ice melt products, but the wording was vague. It said appropriate ice melt products as determined by the board, but did not actually specify what those products were or provide any list of approved items. There was no mention of rock salt specifically, and no list of prohibited products. I drafted a formal response to the violation notice, citing the vague language and requesting specific documentation of the approved product list. I also pointed out that calcium chloride was widely considered a superior and more environmentally responsible choice compared to rock salt. I submitted my response through the HOA portal that evening, feeling somewhat satisfied that I had stood up for myself. The next day was Saturday. I slept in a bit, enjoying the weekend after a brutal work week. Around 10 in the morning, I decided to run some errands. I needed to pick up groceries and wanted to stop by Jensen's Hardware to talk to them about the ice melt situation. Maybe they could provide some documentation about the product quality that would help my case with the HOA. When I pulled into my driveway 3 hours later, I immediately noticed something was off. My driveway looked different. I parked and got out, walking down the driveway to inspect it. The surface was covered in a white residue, and there were chunks of what looked like rock salt scattered across it. My beautiful new concrete driveway now had visible pitting and white stains in several spots. I felt my blood pressure spike. Someone had dumped cheap rock salt all over my driveway, and it had already started damaging the concrete. The temperature had been fluctuating above and below freezing, which meant the salt had gone through several freeze-thaw cycles, accelerating the damage. I immediately pulled out my phone and took photographs from multiple angles, documenting the damage and the rock salt. Then, I checked my Ring doorbell camera. I had installed it a month ago after the second HOA violation notice, figuring I might need to document things around my property. I pulled up the footage on my phone and scrolled back through the morning. At 9:37, a figure appeared on camera walking up my driveway. It was Brenda Hutchinson, and she was carrying what looked like a bag. She glanced around, clearly checking to see if anyone was watching, then started spreading rock salt across my entire driveway. The footage was crystal clear, showing her deliberately covering my driveway in the damaging salt. But then, I noticed something else. After spreading the rock salt, Brenda walked to the side of my house, right up to my garage side door. She tried the handle, and when it did not open, she pulled out her phone, appeared to make a call, then waited. A few minutes later, a white pickup truck pulled up and a man in work clothes got out. They had a brief conversation. Brenda handed him something, and then the man pulled out a tool and worked on my door lock. Within 2 minutes, he had it open. Brenda went into my garage while the man waited outside. I watched in disbelief as she emerged a few minutes later carrying my partial bag of calcium chloride ice melt. She handed the man what looked like cash. He got in his truck and drove away, and she walked back to her house with my ice melt. She had broken into my garage and stolen my ice melt. Then she had vandalized my property by dumping rock salt all over it, and it was all on camera. I saved the footage immediately, backing it up to 3 different locations. Then I sat in my car for a moment, trying to process what I had just witnessed. This was not just an overzealous HOA president enforcing rules. This was breaking and entering, theft, and property destruction. This was actual crime. I called the Naperville Police non-emergency number and explained the situation. They sent an officer out within an hour. Officer Jeff Patterson arrived in his patrol car, and I showed him the footage on my phone. He watched it twice, taking notes. "That is pretty clear-cut," he said. "Breaking and entering, theft and vandalism. We will need you to come down to the station to file a formal report, and we will need you to email us this footage. Do you know the woman in the video? Her name is Brenda Hutchinson. She lives 3 houses down. She is the president of our homeowners association." Officer Patterson raised his eyebrows. "HOA dispute." I explained the whole situation, from the initial violation notice to the vague guidelines to Brenda's visit the previous morning. He shook his head, writing everything down. "We see a lot of HOA disputes, but this is the first time I have seen one involve breaking and entering. Most of them just file lawsuits against each other. We will follow up with Miss Hutchinson. In the meantime, get that lock fixed and consider installing a camera in your garage as well." "What about my driveway? She damaged it." "Document everything. Take lots of photos. Get an estimate for repairs. That will be important for both the criminal case and any civil suit you might want to file. Officer Patterson left, and I spent the rest of the afternoon photographing the damage and researching concrete repair services. The white staining from the rock salt was permanent, and the pitting would need to be professionally repaired. I got 3 estimates over the next week, and they ranged from $1,800 to $2,500. On Monday evening, I got a call from Detective Sarah Martinez with the Naperville Police. She wanted to follow up on my report and asked if I could come to the station the next day to give a more detailed statement. I took a late lunch on Tuesday and met with her at the station. Detective Martinez was thorough, asking detailed questions about my interactions with Brenda, the HOA rules, and the timeline of events. I provided her with copies of all the documentation, including the violation notices, my response, the camera footage, and the repair estimates. "We spoke with Miss Hutchinson yesterday," Detective Martinez said. "She denies breaking into your garage and claims she has no knowledge of your missing ice melt. However, the camera footage is pretty compelling evidence. We are going to continue investigating." "What about the man who opened my door? The locksmith or whoever he was? We are working on identifying him. The license plate on the truck is visible in the footage, so we should have that information soon." I left the police station feeling somewhat hopeful that justice would be served, but also anxious about living 3 doors down from someone who had broken into my property. I had the lock on my garage door replaced that evening with a high-security deadbolt. The next few days were tense. I kept expecting Brenda to show up with another violation notice or for the HOA to take some kind of retaliatory action. Instead, there was just silence. I saw her getting into her car one morning as I was leaving for work, and she pretended not to see me, which was fine by me. On Friday, exactly 1 week after discovering the theft, I got another call from Detective Martinez. "Mr. Irving, we have identified the individual who opened your garage door. His name is Dale Morrison, and he does handyman work around the area. We brought him in for questioning, and he confirmed that Brenda Hutchinson hired him to open your garage door. He claims he thought she was a homeowner who had lost her key and needed to get into her own garage. He also provided us with a receipt showing that Miss Hutchinson paid him $50 in cash for the service. So he is admitting he helped her break in. Essentially, yes, though he is claiming he did not know it was unlawful entry at the time. We are still evaluating what charges, if any, will be filed against him. However, we have sufficient evidence to charge Miss Hutchinson with burglary, theft, and criminal damage to property. We will be executing a search warrant on her residence later today to recover the stolen ice melt if it is still there." My heart was pounding. She is actually going to be charged. Yes, the state's attorney has reviewed the evidence and agreed to move forward with charges. The camera footage is very clear, and Mr. Morrison's statement corroborates your account. Miss Hutchinson will be arrested later today. I thanked Detective Martinez and sat at my desk in a daze. Brenda Hutchinson, the tyrannical HOA president who had made my life miserable over Christmas lights and garbage cans, was going to be arrested for breaking into my garage to steal ice melt so she could justify her bogus violation notice. That evening, I was working on my laptop in my living room when I saw police cars pull up outside Brenda's house. I watched through my window as Detective Martinez and 2 uniformed officers approached the door. Brenda answered, and even from 3 houses away, I could see her face go pale. They spoke for a few minutes, then Detective Martinez held up some papers. A search warrant, I assumed. Brenda stepped aside and the officers entered her house. About 30 minutes later, they emerged. One of the officers was carrying an evidence bag containing what looked like the partial bag of calcium chloride ice melt. My ice melt. Detective Martinez spoke to Brenda again, then produced handcuffs. I watched as Brenda Hutchinson was handcuffed and placed in the back of a police car. Her husband Roger came out of the house looking confused and upset, speaking with the officers. The police cars drove away with Brenda in custody, and I closed my blinds, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and shock. I had never wanted anyone to get arrested. I just wanted to be left alone to live in my house without being harassed over petty rules. But Brenda had escalated the situation into criminal territory, and now she was facing the consequences. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. I saw small groups of neighbors standing in driveways talking, glancing toward Brenda's house. Around 10 o'clock, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find 3 of my neighbors standing there, including Tom Webster from across the street and Linda Chen from next door. "Henry," Tom said, "we heard about what happened with Brenda. Is it true she broke into your garage?" I nodded. "Yeah. She stole my ice melt and then dumped rock salt on my driveway, which damaged the concrete. I had it on camera." Linda shook her head. "We have been dealing with her nonsense for years, but I never thought she would do something illegal. We wanted to let you know that a bunch of us are calling for an emergency HOA meeting to vote her out as president. She cannot represent this community from jail. She is out on bail," Tom added. "Posted bond this morning, but we are done with her. She has been a nightmare since she got elected 3 years ago. This is just the last straw." The third neighbor, a man named Greg Palmer who lived around the corner, spoke up. "I got a violation notice last month because my mailbox post was the wrong shade of black. The wrong shade of black. Cost me $200 plus I had to repaint it. This HOA has gotten completely out of control." We talked for a while, and I learned that nearly every household in Riverside Meadows had at least one complaint about Brenda's reign as HOA president. Ridiculous violation notices, arbitrary enforcement of vague rules, and a general attitude of power-tripping authoritarianism. The ice melt incident had apparently been the final straw for a lot of people. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday at the community clubhouse. I was not sure if I wanted to attend, given that I would probably run into Brenda, but Tom convinced me that my presence would be important. "You are the victim here," he said. "People need to hear your side of the story." In the meantime, I had another problem to deal with. The $200 fine for using unauthorized ice melt was technically still on the books, and according to the HOA bylaws, unpaid fines could result in a lien being placed on my property. I was not about to pay a fine for a violation that Brenda had essentially fabricated as a pretext to harass me, but I also did not want to risk a lien. I reached out to the HOA's management company, a firm called Summit Property Services that handled the day-to-day operations for several communities in the area. I spoke with a property manager named Janet Reynolds and explained the situation. She was sympathetic, but explained that she could not unilaterally cancel fines without board approval. "However," Janet said, "given the circumstances and the pending criminal charges against Miss Hutchinson, I think we can place a hold on the fine pending resolution of the legal matters. I would also recommend that you attend the emergency meeting. There is a lot of support in the community for reforming how the HOA operates." The week dragged by slowly. Work kept me busy, which was good because it kept my mind off the situation. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Brenda had hired a lawyer and was claiming the whole thing was a misunderstanding. Apparently, her story was that she had permission to enter my garage from a previous conversation, which was complete nonsense since we had never had any conversation about her accessing my property. On Thursday, I got an unexpected call from Jensen's Hardware. It was the store manager, a man named Paul Kendrick, who had heard about the situation through local news coverage. The story had made the Naperville Sun with the headline HOA president arrested for burglary in ice melt dispute. "Mr. Irving," Paul said, "I heard about what happened, and I wanted to reach out. The calcium chloride product you purchased has a traceable batch number, as you might remember. If it would help your case, we can provide documentation confirming that the bag recovered by police matches the batch number of the product you purchased." I felt a surge of hope. That would be incredibly helpful. The police have the bag as evidence, and Brenda is claiming it is hers, not mine. We keep detailed records of all premium product sales. I can pull your receipt and the batch number information. Our supplier also tracks these numbers, so we can provide a complete chain of custody showing that the specific bag in question was sold to you, and no one else in the area purchased that same batch. Paul, that would be amazing. Thank you. No problem. We take product quality seriously, and we do not appreciate our tracking system being used to commit crimes. I will have the documentation prepared and sent to the police department. After I hung up, I immediately called Detective Martinez and told her about Jensen's Hardware and the batch number tracking. She sounded pleased. "That is excellent. Physical evidence that directly ties the stolen property to you will make this case even stronger." Brenda's attorney has been arguing that she purchased similar ice melt, and the bag found in her house is hers, not yours. If we can prove through batch numbers that it is specifically your product, that argument falls apart. That afternoon, Paul Kendrick sent me a copy of the documentation he provided to the police. It included my original receipt from February 3rd showing the purchase of one 50-pound bag of calcium chloride ice melt, batch number CC8472 and P0124. The documentation also included a letter from the manufacturer, Great Lakes Chemical Supply, confirming that batch CC8472 and P0124 was distributed exclusively to Jensen's Hardware in Naperville during the last week of January, and only 4 bags from that batch were sold. My receipt showed I had purchased the second bag from that batch, and Jensen's records showed that the other 3 bags had been purchased by customers in different zip codes. The bag recovered from Brenda's garage was photographed by the police, and the batch number visible in the evidence photos was CC8472 and P0124. My batch. My ice melt. Case closed. Saturday arrived, and I drove to the Riverside Meadows Community Clubhouse at 6 o'clock for the emergency HOA meeting. The parking lot was packed, and I had to park on the street. Inside, the meeting room was standing room only. I saw familiar faces from around the neighborhood, people I had waved to but never really talked to. Everyone was buzzing with conversation, and the energy in the room was tense. Brenda Hutchinson was sitting at the front table with 3 other board members, the Vice President Nathan Cross, the Treasurer Diane Miller, and the Secretary Paul Jennings. Brenda looked composed but stressed, her usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. Her husband Roger was sitting in the front row, looking grim. Tom Webster called the meeting to order. As the person who had requested the emergency meeting, he was serving as temporary chair. "Thank you all for coming. This emergency meeting has been called to address serious concerns about the conduct of our HOA president, Brenda Hutchinson, and to consider a vote of no confidence. Before we proceed, I want to remind everyone that we are here to discuss HOA business, not to litigate criminal charges." Those are being handled by the appropriate authorities. Brenda stood up. I would like to make a statement before we proceed. The charges against me are based on a misunderstanding and a vendetta by a resident who refuses to follow community guidelines. I have served this community faithfully for 3 years, and I have always acted in the best interests of property values and community standards. The accusations against me are false, and I will be vindicated in court. There was some murmuring in the crowd. Tom nodded. Thank you, Brenda. The floor is now open for discussion. I would like to start by inviting Henry Irving to share his perspective on the events that led to this situation. All eyes turned to me. I stood up, my heart pounding. Public speaking was not my strength, but I had prepared what I wanted to say. Thank you. I moved to Riverside Meadows 3 months ago, and in that time, I have received 2 violation notices for minor issues that I quickly corrected. The 3rd violation notice was for using calcium chloride ice melt instead of rock salt. I questioned this violation because the community guidelines do not specify which ice melt products are approved or prohibited. The next day, someone broke into my garage and stole the remaining ice melt from the bag I had been using. That same person then dumped rock salt on my driveway, which caused permanent damage to my new concrete. I had security camera footage that showed Brenda Hutchinson hiring someone to break into my garage, stealing my ice melt and vandalizing my property. I paused, looking around the room. I did not ask for any of this. I just wanted to live in my house peacefully. But when someone commits burglary, theft, and vandalism against me, I am going to report it to the police. The evidence is clear. The police recovered the stolen ice melt from Brenda's house, and Jensen's Hardware confirmed through batch numbers that it was the exact product I purchased. This was not a misunderstanding. This was intentional criminal activity. There was a moment of silence, then the room erupted in conversation. Multiple people started speaking at once, and Tom had to call for order. One at a time, please. Linda, you are recognized. Linda Chen stood up. I think we all need to acknowledge that there is a pattern here. Brenda has been issuing violation notices at an unprecedented rate compared to previous HOA boards. According to the records I requested from Summit Property Services, there have been over 200 violation notices issued in the past 3 years. In the 3 years before Brenda became president, there were 38 total. This is not about enforcing reasonable community standards. This is about control and harassment. Another neighbor, a woman I did not know named Patricia, spoke up. I received a violation notice because my lawn was 1/4 inch taller than the maximum height specified in the guidelines. 1/4 inch. Brenda came to my property with a ruler and measured my grass. That is insane. More stories came out. People had been fined for having the wrong color flowers in their gardens, for parking in their own driveways during the day, for having patio furniture that was not on the approved list. It became clear that Brenda had been running the HOA like a personal fiefdom, interpreting vague guidelines in the most strict and punitive way possible. Diane Miller, the treasurer, spoke up. I need to add something here. I have been treasurer for 5 years, serving under 3 different presidents. Under Brenda's leadership, our HOA legal expenses have tripled. We have spent over $40,000 in the past 3 years on legal fees, mostly related to disputes with homeowners over violation notices. Our reserve fund is depleted, and we are going to need to levy a special assessment next year to cover expenses. This is not sustainable. Nathan Cross, the vice president, stood up. I have tried to work with Brenda to moderate her approach, but she has consistently refused to consider any perspective other than her own. I think it is time for new leadership. I am calling for a vote of no confidence in Brenda Hutchinson as HOA president. Tom nodded. A motion has been made for a vote of no confidence. Do we have a second? Second, called out at least 10 people simultaneously. Brenda stood up, her face flushed. This is a witch hunt. You are all turning against me because one resident decided to make false accusations. I have done nothing wrong. Everything I have done has been to protect property values and maintain community standards. If you vote me out, this community will fall apart. Paul Jennings, the secretary, spoke up quietly. Brenda, I have known you for 8 years. We were friends before you became HOA president. But I cannot support what has happened here. The police have evidence. Jensen's hardware confirmed the batch number. This is not false accusations. This is criminal behavior. I think you need to resign before this vote happens. Brenda glared at him. I am not resigning. If they want me out, they can vote me out. Tom called for the vote. All those in favor of a vote of no confidence in Brenda Hutchinson as HOA president, please raise your hand. Nearly every hand in the room went up. I counted quickly and estimated at least 80% approval. All those opposed, only a handful of hands went up, including Roger Hutchinson and 2 other people I did not recognize. The motion passes by overwhelming majority. Brenda Hutchinson is removed as HOA president effective immediately. Per our bylaws, Nathan Cross will serve as interim president until the next regular election. Brenda stood there for a moment, her face a mask of shock and fury. Then she grabbed her bag and stormed out of the meeting, Roger following behind her. The room was silent for a moment, then someone started clapping, and soon the entire room was applauding. Nathan Cross took over the meeting, and the tone immediately shifted. Thank you all for your participation in this difficult but necessary process. As interim president, my first priority is to reform how we handle community guidelines and violation notices. I propose that we establish a review committee to examine every violation notice issued in the past 3 years and determine which ones were justified and which ones were excessive. For those that were excessive, I propose we refund the fines. This was met with enthusiastic approval. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing various reforms including clearer guidelines, a more transparent violation notice process, and limits on the HOA board's authority to interpret rules without community input. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to thank me for standing up to Brenda and for bringing the situation to light. Tom shook my hand. You did the right thing, Henry. A lot of people have been suffering under Brenda's rules but were too afraid to speak up. You gave everyone else the courage to act. Over the next few weeks, the legal process moved forward. Brenda was formally charged with residential burglary, theft, and criminal damage to property. The batch number documentation from Jensen's hardware proved to be the key piece of evidence. Brenda's attorney tried to argue that the batch number could have been a coincidence, or that the documentation was unreliable. But the manufacturer's testimony about their tracking system destroyed that argument. In March, about 5 weeks after the incident, Brenda's attorney reached out to the state's attorney about a plea deal. The evidence was simply too strong to fight at trial. The camera footage showed her hiring someone to break into my garage. She was caught with the stolen property in her possession, and the batch number proved beyond any doubt that it was my ice melt, not hers. Detective Martinez called me to discuss the plea agreement. Miss Hutchinson has agreed to plead guilty to theft and criminal damage to property. The burglary charge will be dropped as part of the deal. She will pay full restitution for the damage to your driveway, which we have assessed at $2,000 based on the repair estimates you provided. She will also serve 200 hours of community service and will be on probation for 2 years. If she violates probation or commits any other offenses, she could face jail time. No jail time, I asked. For a first offense of this nature, jail time is uncommon unless the defendant has a criminal history or the circumstances are particularly egregious. The state's attorney felt that restitution, community service, and probation were appropriate. Miss Hutchinson will also have a criminal record, which will impact her employment and other aspects of her life. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to see Brenda face harsher consequences, but another part of me just wanted the whole thing to be over. What about my legal expenses? I had to pay for the lock replacement, and I have spent a lot of time dealing with all this. The $2,000 restitution is meant to cover your out-of-pocket expenses. If you feel that is inadequate, you could file a civil suit for additional damages. That would be separate from the criminal case. I decided not to pursue a civil suit. The $2,000 would more than cover the driveway repairs and the new lock, and I just wanted to move on with my life. Brenda pleaded guilty in April, and the judge accepted the plea agreement. I attended the hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom. Brenda looked defeated, a far cry from the imperious HOA president who had shown up on my doorstep 3 months earlier to lecture me about unauthorized ice melt. The HOA reforms moved forward as well. Nathan Cross proved to be an excellent interim president, focused on collaboration rather than control. The review committee examined all of Brenda's violation notices and determined that over 60% of them were either excessive or based on incorrect interpretations of the guidelines. Refunds were issued, which depleted the HOA's treasury even further, but the community voted to approve a small special assessment to rebuild the reserve fund. Everyone agreed it was worth it to fix the damage Brenda had caused. The Architectural Review Committee was reformed with clear guidelines about what required approval and what did not. It turned out that decorative lighting on doors did not require approval. Brenda had simply made that up. Same with the restrictions on ice melt products. The vague language in the guidelines about appropriate products was clarified to allow any commercially available ice melt that was safe for concrete, which included both rock salt and calcium chloride. My driveway was professionally repaired in May. The contractor was able to remove the white staining and repair the pitting, though he warned me that the damaged areas might be slightly more prone to cracking in the future. It looked good as new when he finished, and Brenda's restitution check covered the entire cost with a few $100s left over. Life in Riverside Meadows gradually returned to normal, or at least to a new normal. Without Brenda's constant enforcement actions, people felt more relaxed. Neighbors actually started talking to each other more, bonding over their shared experiences of dealing with her excessive rules. The community felt friendlier, more like an actual neighborhood and less like a prison camp. Brenda and Roger kept to themselves. I saw them occasionally, usually leaving in their car or bringing in groceries. Brenda never looked in my direction, and I did not seek out any interaction with her. As far as I knew, she completed her community service at a local food bank and stayed out of trouble during her probation period. The regular HOA election was held in June. Nathan Cross ran for president and won by a landslide. Linda Chen was elected vice president, and several new board members were elected who were committed to the reformed approach to community management. I even considered running for the board myself, but decided I had had enough HOA drama for one lifetime. I was happy to just be a regular homeowner who followed reasonable rules and was left alone. In August, about 6 months after the ice storm that started everything, I was spreading mulch in my front flower beds when Tom Webster walked over from across the street. "Hey, Henry, how is it going?" "Pretty good," I said. "Just trying to get my landscaping in shape before fall." "Looks great." "Hey, I wanted to thank you again for everything that happened with Brenda. I know it was a nightmare for you, but it really did change this community for the better. We had our summer block party last week, and more people showed up than we have had in years. People actually want to be part of this neighborhood again." I smiled. "I am glad something good came out of it, though I could have done without the whole criminal investigation and court proceedings." Tom laughed. "I bet." "Oh, and I meant to tell you, the new HOA board voted to give you a special appreciation award at the next meeting. Nothing fancy, just a plaque thanking you for your service to the community." "That is really not necessary. They want to do it anyway. Just show up at the next meeting and accept it graciously. You are a hero around here, whether you like it or not." After Tom left, I continued working on my flower beds, thinking about the past 6 months. It had been exhausting and stressful, and there were moments when I regretted ever buying a house in an HOA community. But Tom was right that good things had come from it. The community was better now, with reasonable rules enforced fairly rather than petty regulations wielded as weapons. I also learned some important lessons about documentation and standing up for yourself. If I had not installed that Ring camera, there would have been no proof of what Brenda did. If I had not thought to ask Jensen's Hardware about the batch number tracking, there might not have been enough evidence to prove the ice melt was mine. Sometimes, the little details matter more than you think they will. The HOA appreciation plaque now hangs in my home office, next to my college diploma, and a photo of me summiting Pikes Peak a few years back. It is a reminder that sometimes doing the right thing means standing up to petty tyrants, even when it would be easier to just pay the fine and move on. It is a reminder that communities work best when people hold their leaders accountable and demand reasonable governance rather than arbitrary rule enforcement. As for Brenda, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and Roger put their house on the market in September. They moved to a different suburb, presumably to a neighborhood where Brenda had not been arrested for breaking into someone's garage over ice melt. I wish them well, or at least I wish them away from Riverside Meadows. The final twist in the story came in October when I received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Brenda's attorney, and inside was a handwritten note from Brenda herself. The note was brief and formal, but it was an apology. She acknowledged that she had let the stress and responsibility of being HOA president cloud her judgment, that she had become too focused on enforcement and lost sight of the community aspect of the neighborhood. She apologized for breaking into my garage, stealing my property, and damaging my driveway. She said she hoped I could forgive her someday, though she understood if I could not. I read the note twice, then filed it away. I appreciated the apology, but I also knew it did not undo the damage she had caused, not just to me but to dozens of other homeowners who had been harassed with excessive violation notices and unreasonable fines. An apology was a start, but accountability required more than words. Still, I hoped Brenda learned something from the experience. Power, even the minor power of an HOA presidency, can corrupt if not checked by empathy and common sense. Rules exist to serve the community, not the other way around. And sometimes, the most important rule is simply to treat your neighbors with respect and decency. The winter came around again, and when the first snow fell in December, I made sure to purchase my ice melt from Jensen's Hardware again. Paul Kendrick joked about the batch number when he rang up my purchase, and I laughed along with him. This time, I made sure to lock my garage door immediately after storing the bag, and I kept my Ring camera charged and recording. Because you never know when you might need evidence to prove that a HOA Karen stole your ice melt. And when that evidence includes store-confirmed batch numbers, well, that is when the truth becomes undeniable and justice finally gets served, one calcium chloride pellet at a time. I learned to appreciate the small moments of peace in my house. Saturday mornings with coffee on my back deck, watching the birds at the feeder I had installed. Sunday afternoons working on home improvement projects without worrying that some petty rule would result in a violation notice. Weeknight evenings grilling dinner in my backyard, waving to neighbors who walked by with their dogs. These simple pleasures of homeownership had been overshadowed during Brenda's reign, when every decision about your own property had to be filtered through the question of whether it might trigger an HOA complaint. Now, with reasonable leadership and fair enforcement of genuinely important rules, the neighborhood felt like a place where people actually wanted to live rather than a place where people felt trapped by an endless list of regulations. Nathan Cross turned out to be exactly the kind of leader the community needed. At his first official meeting as elected president, he proposed a new philosophy for the HOA that he called common sense governance. The idea was simple. Before issuing any violation notice, board members should ask themselves whether the alleged violation actually harmed the community or diminished property values in any meaningful way. If the answer was no, then probably it was not worth pursuing. This approach dramatically reduced the number of violation notices issued. In Nathan's first 6 months as president, only 12 notices went out, and all of them were for legitimate issues like someone leaving a broken-down car on blocks in their driveway for 3 months, or a homeowner who let their yard become completely overgrown with weeds that spread to neighboring properties. These were real problems that affected other residents, not petty nonsense about the wrong shade of black on a mailbox post. The community's legal expenses dropped accordingly. Instead of spending thousands of dollars per month fighting with homeowners over trivial matters, the HOA was able to invest in actual improvements to the community. The playground equipment was updated. The clubhouse got a fresh coat of paint and new furniture. The entrance landscaping was professionally redesigned with native plants that required less maintenance and looked beautiful year-round. Property values in Riverside Meadows actually increased during this period, despite Brenda's claims that strict rule enforcement was necessary to maintain values. It turned out that people were more willing to pay premium prices for homes in a community that was well-maintained but not oppressively regulated. The neighborhood developed a reputation as one of the more desirable places to live in Naperville, with several real estate agents specifically marketing the reformed HOA as a selling point. I made friends with several of my neighbors during this time, people I probably would never have connected with under the old regime when everyone was too stressed about potential violations to socialize. Tom and his wife Karen became regular dinner companions. Linda Chen and her husband David invited me to join their book club, which met monthly at different members' houses. Greg Palmer asked if I wanted to join his softball team that played in a recreational league during the summer. For the first time since moving to Riverside Meadows, I felt like I was part of an actual community rather than just a resident of a housing development. That sense of belonging was worth more than any perfect lawn or matching mailbox could ever be. The legal conclusion to Brenda's case came in November when she completed her probation requirements. I received a formal notice from the court that the case was closed and that Brenda had fulfilled all terms of her plea agreement. She had paid the restitution, completed her community service hours, and stayed out of trouble for the required period. Her criminal record would remain, but she was no longer under court supervision. I felt a sense of closure reading that notice. The ordeal that had begun with a simple ice storm was finally, truly over. Brenda had faced consequences for her actions. I had been compensated for my damages, and the community had reformed itself into something better than it was before. Justice, in its imperfect human way, had been served. That Thanksgiving, the Riverside Meadows HOA organized a community potluck at the clubhouse. It was optional, of course, because mandatory fun is not really fun. But nearly 70% of the neighborhood showed up, everyone bringing dishes to share and spending the afternoon eating and socializing. Kids ran around playing games while adults caught up with neighbors they might not see regularly. Nathan gave a brief speech thanking everyone for their support of the HOA reforms and acknowledging that the past year had been challenging but ultimately strengthening for the community. He did not mention Brenda by name, but everyone knew what he was referring to. The unspoken message was clear. We had been through something difficult together, and we had come out better on the other side. As I drove home that evening, my car loaded with empty dishes and leftovers that people had insisted I take, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. A year ago, I had been excited about my new house but anxious about the HOA. 6 months ago, I had been in the middle of a criminal investigation and community upheaval. Now, I was a settled member of a functional neighborhood with actual friends and a sense of belonging, all because of ice melt, all because I had bought the good stuff instead of cheap rock salt. All because I had documentation and evidence when someone tried to gaslight me about following rules that did not actually exist. All because I had decided to stand up for myself instead of just paying the fine and moving on. Sometimes, the smallest decisions lead to the biggest consequences. Sometimes, standing up to a petty tyrant over something as mundane as ice melt can change an entire community for the better. Sometimes, justice really does prevail, even when it seems like the system is stacked against you. My first year in Riverside Meadows had been nothing like I expected. It had been harder, more stressful, and more dramatic than I could have imagined when I signed the closing papers on my house. But it had also been empowering in a strange way. I had learned that I could stand up for myself. I had learned that documentation and evidence matter. I had learned that communities can change for the better when people demand accountability from their leaders. As I pulled into my driveway that night, I looked at my house, my beautiful colonial with its new driveway that had been professionally repaired, and its high-security garage door lock. This was my home. I had fought for it, defended it, and emerged victorious from a battle I never asked for but refused to lose. And if anyone ever tried to tell me I was using the wrong kind of ice melt again, well, I had a story to tell them about what happened the last time someone made that particular complaint. A story about HOA overreach, criminal misconduct, batch number tracking, and the sweet satisfaction of watching justice being served to someone who thought they were above the rules they loved to enforce on everyone else. The batch number on my new bag of calcium chloride ice melt was CC9156 and P1124, purchased from Jensen's Hardware on November 18th. I wrote it down in a little notebook I now kept for such purposes, along with the receipt and the date of purchase. Because, if there was one lesson I had learned from this entire experience, it was this: document everything, trust but verify, and never underestimate the importance of a good batch number when proving your case against a HOA Karen who thought she could get away with stealing your ice melt.